I tell you guys, I don't know what to think about this. This podcast we're doing right here. My name is Kyle. I'm with my buddy, partner in crime, Greg. I know you're super excited. I know I am as well. Sports has become so nauseating now for various reasons. And I was talking to you, Greg, a few weeks ago, actually almost over a year ago, about the nature of sports. And we just got fed up with it. We want to do something about it. And so here we are with this new podcast. What are your thoughts about the whole thing, Greg, what we're going to do? Are you nervous? Are you ready for this? What do you think?
Well, first of all, thank you for the opportunity. I'm super excited about it. I know that you and I, we've known each other probably about 20 years, and we've talked about various topics, but sports seems to be the one that you and I can discuss for hours and hours, talking about the various topics involving sports. And the thing about sports is it's such a unique phenomenon where it can be unifying, it can be divisive, it evokes a lot of passion, a lot of out of a lot of people, and it's the gift that keeps on giving as far as water cooler type discussions and that sort of thing. So I'm very much looking forward to discussing not only topics of the day regarding sports, but comparing past and present, and even how sports reaches out to influence other areas of our lives and in society. So, yeah, I'm super excited about this, and I can't wait to get started.
Me too, Greg. And I think you and I both involved in sports in many different ways. But as men, I think part of it is an outlet really to just express ourselves in a physical, competitive way. And what I'm seeing, and I'm pretty much, you're in agreement with this as well, that this particular environment we live in is kind of suppressing a lot of that masculinity, a lot of that competition, a lot of that smash mouth aspect, especially when it comes to physical sports like football and hockey and even basketball. It was a pretty physical game back in the day. And when we think about that, we think about that aspect of it in terms of just competitive masculinity that's kind of being pushed aside now for, I'm not sure what's going on.
Yeah, and I think it's unfortunate. I think it's natural. I believe that, the competitive part of the game, to me, is what you miss most when you stop playing the game. And I think as fans, we like to see a competitive, physical struggle between two teams, and you want to see all the nuances and aspects of that particular game. And when you remove the aggression, when you remove or try to legislate the violence and the collisions and all of that out of these different sports, I mean, what are you left with? And I hope everybody will understand that I'm not advocating guys getting hurt or anything else like that. But I think that having very aggressive, competitive games and competitions, to me, is healthy. That's what the fans want to see. And as athletes, that's what we want, right? So it's disappointing that different leagues are trying to take a lot of the physical aspects out of the sport. I think that takes away from the games in general. But I mean, unfortunately, that's the road we're going down now. Hopefully, clearer heads will prevail on this, and perhaps some of these things can be reintroduced, but I really don't know about that. I think this is a trend that we'll continue to see.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think you're right. I'm hoping that at some point in time that it would get so bad that people will say, enough's enough. Let's get back into that physical aspect, because that is what makes the game exciting, thriving. And we'll get into analytics at some point down the road, but also into, I mean that in the sense like this, for instance, like football. If you can run the ball 3 yards a a down, then all of a sudden that puts a lot of pressure on your defense. And that's just a fundamental thing. There's nothing fancy about running the ball. You block, you don't fumble, and you push forward, and you are stronger, and you push your will on someone else to get those 3 yards every single time. It's not very fun, in terms of a spectator standpoint, if you're just looking at it from outside in, but it is effective and it wins games. So what I'm trying to say here is that hopefully all this nuance, I'm talking about football here particularly, but this also applies to basketball and other areas too, that coaches and fans will say, I'd rather win ugly than have all this finesse and high scoring offenses and lose, so I'm hoping that will swing things back eventually after we had enough of this effeminate style of play.
Yeah, well, I think to your point, the consumer will likely have the final say. And I know that, back when I was a kid, take football, for example, 3rd and 3 was a running down. You didn't have teams throwing 35, 40, 50 times. Thinking about John Riggins, it wasn't anything for him to run it 25, 30 times in a game. The goal, well, if you're going to be successful, you had to be able to run the ball. You had to be able to stop the run. You had to minimize turnovers, create turnovers, and at the end of the day, manage the game better than the other team. That may not be super exciting to watch from a fan's perspective, but I think true fans enjoy that sort of thing. I'd rather see a game that ends 17-14 than a game that ends 51-48. I just do. I think when there's an element of struggle between the two teams, I think that's more appealing, at least for me to watch, than to just see up and down, up and down, up and down, where there's no defense, nobody stopping anybody. It's basically, okay, whoever has the last possession wins and that kind of thing. So I think today's game doesn't lend to a lot of that. And some of it, I'm sure, has to do with rule changes, but that's just the way, the game is now. 3rd and 2, teams are throwing the ball. And that's just so foreign to me as far as when I played and as far as when I watched as a kid. So it's a lot different, but I think still at the end of the day, at some level, you still have to impose your will physically against the other team. Successful teams in the NFL, when it gets right down to it, they're able to sustain 6, 7, 8 minute drives and just able to run, and basically just pound the other team into submission. Teams that can do that effectively, they're the ones that are going to still win games more times than not. So I think there's still a place for it, even in today's league, but unfortunately, I don't think you see as much of it as you used to.
You bring up an interesting point. I was going to go down the Woody Hayes, Ohio State aspect, but I'm going to kind of jettison that for a little bit and talk about the Canadian Football League of all things. And I remember this because being in Maryland at the time, Baltimore got a Canadian football team. And this is back in the 90s, I believe, and this is just off the top of my head, I believe they won a Grey Cup, which is their equivalent of the Lombardi Trophy, Super Bowl. And in the Canadian Football League, if you guys don't know, you only get 3 downs to get your 10 yards, I believe. And so no one ever, hardly ever ran the ball in the Canadian League. That's where we had Doug Flutie was there, I believe. I think that was for all those yards, and I think Warren Moon was there for a while. Correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot of passing yards were done. It even had a bigger end zone, so there's more room in the red zone, so just no reason not to pass. But for some reason, Baltimore just ran the ball. I think they won back-to-back championships, and they ran like records up. And they just did what you said, Greg. No one was built for the CFL that year to deal with a run-first team. So they were running for 6 yards a carry. I mean, down the field, and no one could stop it. So I'm gonna look that up again, make sure I got my facts straight. But I'm pretty sure that was true. Do you remember that happening um, in CFL? And if you don't, I'm sure you can appreciate the fact of that actually working for that kind of a league.
I do remember Baltimore having a CFL team. I thought the notion was odd, but it sounds like it worked out fairly well for Baltimore. The other thing, too, that a strong physical running game does, it demoralizes the defense after a while. They know it's coming and they still can't stop it. I mean, at some point, it's a battle of wills. It's like, okay, does that linebacker want to continually step up full speed and run head on with a 6'2", 230-pound running back or fullback or whatever it is? After a while, I mean, your want to kind of goes away a little bit. And, that's something that, can't be dismissed as far as what it does to the other team's psyche when you just pound on them, pound on them, pound on them, pound on them, and there's nothing they can do to stop it. So I still think it's very effective. And even in games today, when the games get late and a team has to basically play out the clock to win the game, you still see it where teams will run and, maybe the other team can't stop them and they, ice the game that way. But I'd like to see a lot more of it, but not sure if we'll go back to the way the game was played in the 60s and 70s. I think the league wants as many eyeballs on these games as possible. And I think to the league, it's more entertainment than competition. They want people to be entertained, and they probably look at it like, well, if these games are ending 9-0 or 10-3 and it's defensive struggle, that's not entertaining. I think they look at scoring being the equivalent to entertainment. I just don't see it that way. But yeah, it's refreshing to see teams that still play that way and teams that can be effective and win that way.
Yeah, 100%. In fact, I'm looking it up now. The Baltimore Stallions, who they were, it was a 95 season, 94 season, 95 season. They went to the Grey Cup in 94. They lost in the finals 17-10 against, looks like the BC Lions. They were actually up in that game, ended up losing. They went back the following year at 95 and went up against a high potent Doug Flutie-led team and beat them in the ground. I'm reading here, it says Tracy Ham was a quarterback. Robert Drummond and Mike Pringle were the running backs. The most potent backfield in the CFL history. Rushed for 1,700 yards. I mean, and they ended up beating the Doug Flutie team. They looked like they beat them 37-20. And they had a pounding defense. This is a team, again, we only have 2 downs essentially to get a first down because third down is basically a punting down. And they dominated. They ended the year on a 16-game winning streak. And so, to me, that just epitomizes what it needs for football. Because at the end of the day, it's physics, right? Like you said, imposing someone's will. And I'll go back to Woody Hayes, where he said basically, when you pass the ball, only 3 things can happen, and 2 of them are bad. So that's why I like the fact that we're doing this show to kind of reminisce on some of these things and talk about sports the way we want it to be. It's not just going to be football, but it's going to be a big part of it. I love football. We're going to talk about boxing. We're going to talk about the Olympics. We're going to talk about baseball, analytics, and all kind of cool stuff. LeBron James, of course. But that's what I'm excited about, Greg. What are you excited about mostly about this show and what we're going to be doing in the next few weeks? Who knows how long we're going to be doing this?
Sure. So before it slips my mind, I think Warren Moon also played in the CFL, and I believe he set a bunch of records up there before he came into the NFL with the Houston Oilers. So there were quite a few talented players that played in the CFL, and some of them went on to have success in the NFL. So I'm really excited about being able to discuss sports with someone that can discuss it at a level that's beyond, X's and O's and the heat of the moment reactions to things that happen in sports on a daily basis, because sometimes what we look at, there's more under the surface to kind of get after and talk about. And that's an aspect of this particular show I'm super excited about, because, you hear a lot of analysis, uh, on a very general level, but, being able to kind of peel back the onion, so to speak, and talk about some things that are a little deeper than what you see on TV when you watch these games. So, and, also sports, have been, excuse me, have been such a big part of my life as an athlete, as a sports parent, as a referee, a coach, a fan. So it's been a big part of my life and who I am as a person. I think sports has helped shape my character and work ethic. I couldn't imagine a life without sports. I mean, it's just been such a big part of my life and my family's lives as well. So yeah, just so many different things that we can talk about. And, I'm sure there'll be things that right now we're not even thinking of that we'll wind up talking about. So the unknown is kind of exciting as well. So yeah, just very much looking forward to this, and hopefully the folks that are listening to us will enjoy our banter back and forth. So.
Me too. In fact, you know what, Greg? I'll say this real quickly. I told you this before, is that I don't have much of an outlet anymore with sports. You and I did fantasy football for many, many years, and you can brag about how many championships you won over me. I won 3. I think you won 6. How many did you win?
I won 5, and I recently won a Yahoo Fantasy Football Championship a few weeks ago, so 6 total.
Oh, congratulations!
Thanks.
Yeah, and when I ran this, we gave out these nice trophies too. I'll show you mine, and his looks just like it. He just has more of them than me do. I do. I think actually you beat me in the finals. I believe. I can't remember what it was.
I did. Yeah. It was a few years ago, but yeah, I did beat you in one of the championship games. So,
Yeah.
and fantasy, that's another thing that helps to make sports fun, and it encourages people to be involved, whether it's just watching the games or at least following that particular sport. So I think fantasy has been a shot in the arm to a lot of these sports, because, so I'm sure they're just maybe casual fans or maybe not fans at all that care about these sports because of fantasy or just whatever it is. And, to me, that's a good thing. So, and I think that's a curious thing too, where, some sports, you have your casual fan that will watch from time to time, but they're still interested. And, you can't say that about everything. You either have your hardcore fans or no fans at all. So I think that's another aspect of sports that's pretty cool. You have your hardcore fans, and you also have casual fans, and I think they're just as vital. So yeah, I think it's going to be great. So.
Yeah, I just want to talk to you about a little bit about, you mentioned Warren Moon. I just pulled some information up about him. Right here on the Wikipedia says that his success during the CFL seasons, he played in 6. 5 of them ended in championships. He won 2 Grey Cup MVPs, and at the time of his retirement, Moon held several all-time professional gridiron football passing records, and although relatively unsuccessful in the NFL postseason, only because he played Well, he lost that he actually was the one who lost to the Bills in 92 or 91 actually, when they came from behind. Um, they were up by like, I don't know how many, about 30 points a half, something like that.
I think it was like
And then
35-3. I watched that game. It was just
yeah.
amazing to watch the Bills come back from that deficit.
So, but yeah, he had great arm strength, and he was just, and back then, I'm not gonna, you know me, Greg, I don't bring up race at all, but I have to here only because we're talking about him being a black quarterback. He was not a dual threat guy, right? And neither was Doug Williams. These guys were all pocket passers, stay the last minute, take the hit. So no, and so yeah, so but he was a prototype, and he had a tremendous arm, and he had, and I think he's also wasn't he also? Well, I'm thinking about McNair. McNair was different at Alcorn State. He broke all those records there, but and he wasn't much of a runner as much. He could throw the ball too, but we'll get into that too. But in terms of the whole passing versus dual threat versus all of that, but so I'm excited about the same things you mentioned too, Greg, in terms of that. I'm excited really about the fact that we're going to be able to expose a lot of the wokeness. You know, this is still part of the conservative take. We're not going to talk a lot of politics, but the culture of it is going to be on my heart mostly because of what I see and how the game has changed, not just football, but just about every single sport is changing in some sort of way. And it's making it almost not fun to watch. So that's what I'm excited about. And what I would also say is I have a hope that this will actually grow to the point where people can actually have the kind of discussions where they can say, you know what, those guys, those crazy guys on that podcast made a good point. And that whole narrative and thing gets to a snowball where people are actually talking about it and becomes more of a consciousness as to why the game isn't as good as it could be, even though they're throwing up big numbers. Like right now, I just saw a stat in NBA. They've had like 8 or 9 60-point performances in the past, 5 years, something like that. Whereas when you had Jordan and Bird and Magic and Kobe, those guys did it, but it wasn't at the rate that we're doing it now. But just because they're scoring more points, does it make the game better? I don't think so. So I'm excited about that. What are your thoughts about anything I said there?
Sure. So to go back to what you were talking about with Warren Moon, I remember when he played for the University of Washington, fantastic quarterback, great arm. And unfortunately, back then, I think he graduated from Washington like in, I don't know, 77 or somewhere in there. There were still doubts about whether or not a black player could play quarterback in the NFL. It's sad to say, but it was true. And I think that may have been part of the reason why he went to Canada first, because NFL insiders weren't convinced he could play quarterback at that level. And I'm glad to say he proved them wrong. As far as these scoring outbursts in the NBA, I think Luka scored, what did he score the other night?
78.
I think it was it 73 or something like that?
Something like that, yeah, over 70.
And Embiid, I think, scored 70, and you've got a few other guys that have scored 60 and above. I'm not knocking their talent. These guys are super talented. I think that speaks a lot to the rules where, you can't hand check guys. You can't, as a defensive player, your hands are kind of tied as to what you can do against, offensive players. And I think as you watch these games, and I just started, kind of watching the NBA again, and, to me, it's just hard to watch, chucking up a lot of threes and, running up and down the floor, not a lot of defense getting played. So I think just the way the game is officiated and played today, I just think it's easier to score that many points if you are a skilled and talented player. You certainly wouldn't have seen all of these different guys scoring that many points in the 90s during Jordan's era. But, that's the way the game is now because, and I can remember back in the 90s, and David Stern was the commissioner back then, the league basically made a conscious decision to tweak the rules to where it would make it easier for the offense to score points. You can't steer a guy in a particular direction, hand checking and that sort of thing. No more hard fouls when a guy takes the ball to the basket. I'm not knocking that rule. I know it's there to protect the guys. Again, I don't want to see anybody get hurt, but you could hand check, you could arm bar, there are things you could do to slow down the progress of the offensive player that you can't do anymore. There's defensive 3 seconds, so you can't, pack the lane and other rules that just make it so much easier for guys to score. So I think that's a conscious decision by the NBA because they feel like, well, when games are 130 to 125 instead of 98-95, more people want to watch that. But I mean, I would argue that during the time when the Bulls three-peated twice, everybody wanted to watch the Bulls. I mean, my mom, who is not a basketball fan at all, she'd watch when the Bulls were on. When are the Bulls coming on? Is Jordan on? What did he do last night? And I think she was typical of, maybe a casual 100%. Fan that
I wasn't even Chicago Bulls fan still now.
They were excited when the Bulls came on or when the Bulls came to town. So, and those games were like, 98-95 or 100-90 or whatever. And those were, to me, very exciting because, again, going back to what I said at the top, people wanted to see that competitive struggle where every basket counted and, every turnover counted. And if you look back at those games, you didn't see teams chucking up, 30 and 40 3-point shots. They shot them, but, much more selectively. It wasn't the core part of their offense. They were still running their offense, inside out and that sort of thing. So those types of things that are just so different with sports now as opposed to then or, during whenever the glory era was for any particular sport, that in itself sparks interesting debate. So looking forward to all of those things.
Well, yeah, I have to agree with you, Greg. We have a lot to talk about. And just so the audience knows a little bit about me, my mentality, I come from the DC area in the 80s and 90s. And I went to John Thompson basketball camp 2 years in a row, got a chance to talk to him, ask him questions about his time at the Celtics and stuff like that. And got a chance to meet people like Craig Shelton and Sleepy Floyd and Patrick Ewing. Literally met these guys when they were like first year. Well, I think Sleepy Floyd was coming out, but at the time, Ewing was a freshman coming in. I got to see him scrimmage. Here I am, this 13-year-old kid watching this giant of a player, future Hall of Famer, and it's just amazing to me and to see him. And then they won the championship, not but 2 years after that. And then to actually have instilled in me the work ethic of a John Thompson. And I'm telling you guys, Greg, we got to do a story just on the Georgetown Hoyas, because I can tell you what it was like to be in a room with John Thompson when you had to be disciplined because you didn't do something based on his rules. And this is in 83, 82, somewhere in there. And I'm telling you guys, he would have been canceled. He would have been kicked out because nothing bad happened, but they were not messing around when it came to discipline. And I'll save that for a later story. But yeah, I think you find it very interesting with that. But that's my mentality. I'm a Redskins fan. And like you mentioned John Riggins. We could talk about John Riggins too. We should probably do a show on him too. Heck, we can do a show on Larry Zonka. We could do one on Lynn Swan. We could pick a player. And there's so much, Greg, to talk about that would actually contrast so much with what we see today. And I think for younger generation people who hear this may have no idea. These stories are long gone. And so I know you and I are on the same age, and we have the same experiences, the same worldview and perspective. And I think it'd be really enjoyable to go down memory lane, but at the same time, bring in the focus as to where we are today and how different it is. Not necessarily better. I know there's a generational thing there. I would say it's probably better. But at least contrast it and say what is good and what isn't good and what we can maybe strive for down the road. So, Greg, I'll give you the last word on this in terms of our likes and desires and hopes and fears in some ways doing this podcast. But I'll let you close this out, Greg, and let us know what you think about what's going forward and anything else you want to say.
Sure. So yeah, thank you for that. I think the other thing that I'll be interested to see is, of course, when you talk about things from a particular perspective and you give your opinion on certain things, not everybody's going to agree. And I think that's healthy. I think that's a way we can all learn and grow, is to listen to, opposing viewpoints, looking at things in a way that maybe, we had not thought of before. So hopefully it'll spark that kind of debate amongst our listeners. There may be some things that we talk about where our viewpoint is something that not everybody may agree with, and that's perfectly okay. Again, I think that's an opportunity to learn, because quite frankly, a lot of our listeners may be a lot younger. They may have no idea about how the game was played back in the 60s and 70s and that sort of thing. So they may only have a perspective from, nowish. So I think this is a good opportunity to potentially learn some things from both sides of the conversation. As I think as older guys, we have an idea as to how we feel like things ought to be in sports. But, to hear a perspective from maybe a younger person that says, well, hey, I understand what you're saying, but you've got to look at it from our point of view. It's different. And here's how, the way it is now, it's not going to go back to the way it was, likely, because this is how it is. And let me explain why. So that will be interesting as well. So I think this show has a ton of potential. I think there are a lot of things we can touch on that will be not only entertaining, but insightful. So those are the types of things I'm looking forward to. And again, thank you for the opportunity. I really do appreciate it. And again, this is awesome. And I'm really looking forward to get going.
Me too. And just to do a little bit of housekeeping, I guess, we can be found on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts, as well as YouTube with the video version. So the video version will be on YouTube only. The audio versions will be on Spotify, Apple, and Google. And if you go to podcast.theconservative take, you can see it there on the screen. You can check it out there, and there's a centralized link there, and you can access us there as well. And so if you guys are also members of the Conservative Take YouTube member, you have early access to this as well. We're working through this, but that's the kind of the format for now. And Greg, thank you so much. This is the first episode, and we're looking forward to doing many, many, many more, and hopefully making an impact and having fun while we're doing it. So with that, guys, thank you so much for this episode of the Old Glory Games podcast. My name is Kyle, and this is speaking on behalf of Greg. And you want to say goodbye, Greg, and we can call this bad boy a wrap.
All right. Thanks again. You all take care. Appreciate you.
Bye-bye.